You've almost certainly seen this photograph. The bright eyes of this 3-year-old girl are recognized all over the world. For more than a decade now, her face has been at the very center of one of the most sprawling and frankly heartbreaking missing person cases in modern history. So today, we're going to walk through the story of Madeleine McCann. And really, that's the one question that everything comes down to, isn't it? It's the question that has launched a massive international investigation, fueled a media frenzy like no other, and just completely captured the public's attention for years and years. And despite all the theories, all the leads, all the searching, that fundamental question, it's still officially unanswered. So let's dive into the details. So let's go back to where it all began. We're at a holiday resort on Portugal's beautiful Algarve coast. The McCann family, they're on the very last night of their vacation with a group of friends, staying in apartment 5A of the Ocean Club complex. What started out as a totally normal, relaxed evening was about to turn into a nightmare that would spark a global search. Okay, let's walk through the timeline of that night, because the sequence of events is just so crucial. At 8:30 p.m., the McCanns and their friends go to dinner at a tapas bar that's super close by. They have a system worked out for checking on their sleeping children. So at 9:05, Jerry McCann goes to check. All 3 kids are asleep. But he did notice something odd. The bedroom door was wider open than they had left it. A little while later, at 9:30, a friend offers to do the next check. He pops his head in, sees the twin toddlers, but he doesn't get a good look at Madeleine's bed. And then, the final check. At 10 p.m., Kate McCann goes into the apartment and she finds the window open, the shutter raised, and Madeleine's bed completely empty. That one cry just shattered the peace of the holiday resort and kicked off a frantic search. You know, in those first few moments, people probably thought a small child had just wandered off, as kids sometimes do. But that open window and the raised shutter, it very quickly changed everything. It shifted the focus from a lost child to something far more sinister, an abduction. Let's move on and look at how that initial response actually played out. In any missing person case, you always hear about the golden hours, that first critical window of time to gather evidence and find solid leads. Well, in this case, that crucial period was, let's just say, messy. It was complicated by several factors that would end up haunting the investigation for years. And this slide really shows you what I mean. The apartment itself, the primary crime scene, it wasn't immediately sealed off. A whole bunch of people went in and out before it was properly secured for forensics, which of course creates a huge risk of contaminating evidence. Then you have this. Alerts to border and marine police weren't sent out for hours. And maybe most shocking, it took a full 5 days for Interpol to issue a global missing person alert. With delays like that, a critical window of opportunity was just lost. Now, to make things even more confusing right at the start, there were 2 totally different sightings. The first one, called the Tanner sighting, was from one of the McCann's own friends. Around 9:15 p.m., she saw a man carrying a child. For years, this was seen as the most important lead. But then there was the Smith sighting. An Irish family, also on holiday, saw a different man carrying a child, but this was closer to 10 p.m. It took until 2013 for a big Scotland Yard review to conclude that the first sighting was probably just an innocent tourist with his own kid. And just like that, the focus shifted to that later Smith sighting as the more likely timeline. Okay, before we go any further, there's this really important Portuguese legal term we have to understand, argüido. Basically, if you're named an argüido, it means you're a formal suspect. You haven't been charged with a crime, but you are officially under investigation, and it gives you certain legal protections, like the right to remain silent. And this status was about to be given to the 2 people at the absolute heart of this case. Right, so 4 months into the investigation, with no real leads on an abductor, the Portuguese police did something pretty shocking. They changed their entire theory. They started looking into the possibility that Madeleine had actually died in an accident right there in the apartment, and that her parents had covered it up. And in September of 2007, both Kate and Jerry McCann were formally named arguidos. A big part of this new theory was based on forensic dogs reacting in the apartment and in a car the McCanns had rented, 24 days after Madeleine disappeared. Now, you might remember the media headlines at the time screaming about a 100% DNA match being found in the car. But what did the science actually say? Well, look at this official conclusion from Britain's own forensic science service. The sample was deemed too complex for meaningful interpretation. The key takeaway here is that the scientific evidence was anything but a slam dunk. The McCann's argüido status was eventually lifted in July 2008 because there just wasn't enough evidence. So, after the McCanns were cleared and the original Portuguese investigation was basically put on a shelf, the search didn't stop. It continued through private investigators and eventually a whole new official inquiry. And over the years, this has led investigators down so many different rabbit holes, looking into dozens and dozens of people. This table gives you a quick snapshot of the main formal suspects, or argüidos, over the years. The very first was Robert Murat, a guy who lived really close to the apartment. He was cleared in 2008. We've just talked about the McCanns, who were also cleared that same year, and then silence for a long time. Until, more than a decade later, the spotlight swivels dramatically onto a brand new person, Christian Brückner, who German police named as their prime suspect in 2020. After years of relentless campaigning by the McCanns, the British government finally decided to step in a big way. In 2011, London's Metropolitan Police, Scotland Yard, launched its own full-scale review of the case. They called it Operation Grange, and their whole approach was to start from scratch, re-examine every single piece of evidence with the main assumption that this was a criminal act by a stranger. And when I say they stepped in, they put some serious resources behind it. I mean, get this. To date, Operation Grange has cost over £13 million. That is an immense amount of money for a single case. And that funding has kept a small team of dedicated detectives working, following up on thousands of leads and sifting through mountains of material from the Portuguese investigation, all for that one glimmer of hope for a breakthrough. Which brings us right up to the present day and the main focus of the investigation. In 2020, German police identified Christian Brückner. He's a German citizen with a history of sexual offenses who, crucially, was living in the Algarve back in 2007. They say that cell phone data places him in Praia da Luz on the very night Madeleine vanished. This is what led to those major searches in Portugal in 2023. Now, it's important to remember he is the prime suspect, but he's never actually been charged in connection to this case. And as you can see from this timeline, his legal situation in Germany for other crimes is still very much in flux. So, after all this time, all the money, all the man-hours, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann is still one of the world's most famous unsolved cases. But the story's impact goes way beyond just the search for one missing little girl. Its ripple effects have been huge, leaving a lasting mark on policing, the media, and all of us, really. I mean, the media attention was just on another level. It became the most heavily reported missing person case in modern history. And that intensity sparked a really fierce and frankly necessary debate about press ethics and intrusion into a family's private grief. It even became a major case study in the UK's big Levinson inquiry into the press. It also shined a very harsh light on just how difficult it can be for police forces from different countries to work together. And through it all, the McCann's refusal to give up has made this case a powerful symbol of hope against all odds. And so we end right back where we started, with a question. As memories get foggier and forensic trails grow colder, investigators in 3 different countries are still working. But whether the complete, true story of what happened in apartment 5A on that May night in 2007 will ever really come to light, well, that remains the great unanswered mystery.